So continuing on in my series of Indigenous European practices that people think only belong to certain cultures, I want to bust that myth and talk about the European version of sweat lodges. But I do want to mention two YouTubers that I really recommend. I've recommended this person before on a previous video, and that is Arith Harger. He has a really good video out today. And I touched on it briefly before. It kind of touches on people who are sensitive to cultural appropriation and that the gods, I'm telling you, they don't care, that only humans care if you practice another culture's animistic techniques and beliefs. But his video today, I'll put a link to it below, kind of expands on what I've mentioned in previous videos, that we've incarnated in every different culture, every different race. We don't keep reincarnating as white European descent or an African or an Asian every time we reincarnate. So his video, it's like an hour long, but it's a really good video and I recommend it. And another channel I want to recommend is Freyia Norling. I will put her channel also below, and she lives in Norway. Her channel is a lot about Nordic witchcraft, but it's super raw and primal. Her videos are like works of art. I love watching her videos. So I do recommend to follow her and support her on her Patreon channel, and Arith if you are so inclined. I don't watch very many YouTube channels, but these two I really recommend, especially if you are interested in Norse shamanism and witchcraft. Freyia actually performs them and her environment is just so beautiful. Yeah, so I'll put those links below. Okay, so moving on to our topic for today is European sweat lodges. Okay, so typically what they are called in Europe, and even here, we call them saunas. And that is a Sami language, who are the indigenous inhabitants of Finland. With archaeological finds, they are discovering or have discovered small domed buildings made out of stone. And they usually will have some type of small ventilation at the top of it. So you can think of these as like permanent Native American, what they call sweat lodges. And there is one saga, and I can't remember, maybe I'll put it up above somewhere, that refers to some of these places even being under the ground or dug into the ground or the side of a hill. And as far as archaeologists can tell, the main function of these saunas were places of transition. And so it was a place where women would go to give birth. It was a place where someone would go when they are in the final days of death. They would even bring in someone, if they had died, they would bring them in this sauna, and they would purify them and wrap them in the sauna. It was used if you had an illness. They believed that if you sweated it out, it would help cure this illness that you were going through. It was used by the spiritual leaders, the shamans or the Völvas of the tribes, to perform their healing ceremonies, their rituals, their magic, their spells. It was used for that also. It was considered very sacred. It was also most likely used for even curing meat or drying meat out, or drying out materials that were to be used to weave with. It also seems like they were used for ancestor worship because it was a big part of their rituals and ceremonies and transitions in life. And so the ancients believed that ancestors often visit places that they enjoyed while they were alive. It was used as purification before a marriage, or it was just a rite of passage coming into puberty. There are written accounts of explorers in these areas where they describe animal pelts covering structures that had hot stones inside of them where water would be poured onto them. So it is a place of rebirth or any type of transition in a person's life. And there are records, and I'm going to have to find the source. I can't find it right now, but I have read it somewhere that the deity that oversaw the sweat lodge was a goddess, because the sauna or the sweat lodge represented the womb, the mother's womb, the womb of earth. It was circular, feminine. It was dark, as when we're in the mother's womb. It is complete darkness. It is moist and wet, like inside of the amniotic fluid and the inside of the body. And it is warm and it is hot, like the temperature of our body at almost 99 degrees. It was considered going back to the mother, the womb. So these places represent also the 4 elements. It represents earth, the gathering of wood, and which these stones will be placed on top of. Then there is the fire element, where they light the fire, and the fire heats the stones. The stones are then carried either into the structure, or the fire was sometimes inside the structure. And that's why in Europe there was ventilation, because, didn't want like carbon monoxide poisoning or whatever. So I know Native American, there's not always ventilation, that the stones are heated in a separate location and brought in. And so then you have the water element, where the water is poured over the hot rocks. And then you have the steam, which represents air. So all the elements are included in the ceremony of the sauna. The doors were typically lower, so you had to bow or crawl in, and that's typical also of Native American sweat lodges. There was a smudging, or in Europe they call it reekening or seining, and mugwort was most likely used instead of sage, but there was still the same. It's all the same, except we do them in slightly different ways. And so usually the spiritual leader would conduct the sweat lodges or the saunas and the ceremonies. Be the one that pour the water on. If there was Galder spoken, any type of singing. Sometimes it does show that there's a saying, there's 3 rounds, that some of the rounds are done in silence. Another round could be a community talk that, something needs to be decided. So it was very, very important, sacred part of the village. They would often use birch leaves or make a birch wand, either burn it, or they would use it on people to further purify the attendance of the ceremony. So it could either be used as a community sweat sauna, or a shamanic practitioner would go in and use it alone, or it would be a birth where the mother and the midwife was there. So there was a lot of purposes to these saunas. So Europeans did use sweat lodges, which we call saunas, and eventually they went from building them out of stone into building them out of timber. That is where we get our modern day saunas. You still see saunas all over, especially Northern Europe. The true saunas, there is a flame. It's not electric. I know there's a lot of electric ones out now, but there's a flame, there's wood, there's stones. You pour water over the stones. You sit, and it's more of a ceremony type. That was the original use of the sauna. So another practice that is animistic and common in all cultures. So don't forget, Europeans were indigenous at some point also. All right, so that is it for today, and I will see you on the next video.